Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tom Wolf, and this is called The Voices of Recovery. It's just short interviews that I'm doing with individuals that are in recovery that have maybe experienced homelessness. We're going to talk to Jared today, who is in recovery from addiction, thankfully, and is formerly homeless. He lived on the streets of Los Angeles and Skid Row. He's also been homeless in New York and Miami, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his experience and what it took to get off the street and more importantly, how life is now in recovery. So, Jared, welcome and thank you so much for coming on and talking to me today.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Great. So, one of the first things I wanted to focus on since, we're having a really huge homeless issue in California. In fact, 40% of the nation's homeless is in California right now. We have anywhere from 160,000 to 200,000 people sleeping unsheltered, either on the street, sleeping rough, or in their car every single night. And we also have a huge drug crisis that's ravaging the homeless community. And it's been part of the homeless community. You can't talk about homelessness and not talk about drugs because they've been intertwined for a really long time. But it just seems like now with the arrival of illicit fentanyl and the arrival of like a new kind of meth that seems to be out on the street that's affecting people and seems to be driving kind of a new kind of meth-induced psychosis. I wanted to talk to people that have actually been there and experienced it and can tell us a little bit about what it's like. So, um, first question I guess I have for you is if you could just tell me a little bit about your background and how you ended up actually living on the streets and struggling with addiction.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it begins. I was born in Boston. My parents were heroin addicts. They eventually got arrested, and I was taken away when I was 12 years old, and I was adopted by my aunt in Oakland. And just to fast forward, I you know felt out of place, given that my parent, the way I was raised with drug addict parents, and found safety and a feeling of comfort in alcohol. And that eventually led to um, me getting prescribed some Vicodin for a tooth surgery. And I fell in love with opiates and really devoted my entire life to them. And my family, having knowledge about opiate addiction with my parents, were not enablers. I mean, they immediately said, you either going to do drugs and we're never going to talk to you again, or you're going to get off drugs. And I couldn't just snap my fingers and get off drugs. So pretty early on, I found myself with no family support, which I now am grateful for because it sort of sped up the process of me cleaning up my life. But I found myself homeless around the age of 22 in Los Angeles, on Skid Row, because that's kind of just where you end up when you're homeless in Los Angeles. That's where all the services are, and that's where you can sort of legally be homeless. I mean, you can set up a tent and live your life. And it was a long journey after that of a lot of geographical moves where to my surprise, but not to many others, I became homeless wherever I went. I mean, wherever I went, I couldn't stop doing drugs. And when I do drugs, I will willingly not pay rent and sleep outside if I still have my job, and then I will lose my job, and I will be homeless. And I know how to be homeless. So it seemed to just be the natural path for about 8 years,
So
off and on.
when you say you know how to be homeless, what exactly do you mean by that?
I know in Los Angeles, I've been homeless in San Francisco. I know, first of all, I know where to go. I know where you're not going to get trouble. I know where you're allowed to be homeless. Second of all, I know how to make money. I know how to make more money than I do now with a professional job. I can make $400 to $500 a day being homeless, and that is through theft. It's a very it's a very precise system of you find people, there's fences, there's people that buy stolen goods, and they tell you what they want, and you go into stores and you take those goods, and um, it can be very lucrative if you're good at it. I know how to be a criminal. I mean, really, I mean, that's just, and I learned that. I didn't, I wasn't homeless the first day and knew what I was doing, but I ran with other people, and people took me under their wing, and I learned how to do that. And I know how to, sacrifice my dignity and just kind of I can sleep outside. I know the public restrooms that I can go in and do drugs in and take bird baths. And I just, it's a whole system that you just get very, when you have to get good at it, you get good at it. You know?
So one of the arguments is that people that are homeless, they steal out of the desperation because they're homeless. But one of the things that I've always kind of said is that if you're homeless and you're struggling with addiction, if you're committing crimes, it's usually to support your addiction. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, with an example of Skid Row, there is plentiful amounts of food. Every church in Los Angeles, every mosque, every temple goes down there and gives out amazing food. Um, so I ate really well when I was down there, and I can only speak for myself, but when you're stealing things to sell for money, I've never met someone that was doing that, and I've met hundreds of people that do this. I've never met someone that did that to buy food or buy essentials. It was to buy drugs. I mean, that's what it is. And sure, I mean, I've stolen a sandwich here. If you're stealing some food, I understand, sometimes you're hungry, but I've known people that steal food to sell for drugs. I mean, steaks and more expensive items. But
Right.
it's, I mean, listen, just in my experience, 100% of the people I've encountered that professionally shoplift or professionally steal are doing it to support a drug habit.
And so tell us a little bit about like what's it like living homeless on Skid Row? What is that experience?
Well, I was homeless on Skid Row in 2011 for about 9 months or so, and then I was homeless on Skid Row again in 2015 for about a year, a little bit more than a year, and that's just a 4-year difference, but it was very different between those two segments of homelessness. In 2011, it was, I'd say, a little bit more difficult. You could set up a tent and sleep on Skid Row, but every morning the police would drive around and make people collapse their tents at around 5 or 6 a.m. And you'd have to carry your tent around every day or have a good hiding place for it, which was rare. You usually had to carry it around. So it was difficult. I mean, you had to carry around your belongings. So your belongings were limited to a backpack and a bag that fit your tent. And there was no, there was just heroin and cocaine on Skid Row in 2011. When I found myself back on Skid Row in 2015, it was a lot easier. You could leave your tent pitched 24/7, and therefore you could leave your belongings in your tent. And if you had an encampment with several people, you could take turns watching the camp, and it was just a little bit more easier. But one of the main differences that I saw in 2015 was that meth was on Skid Row, and it was ridiculously cheap. This new meth came out, and I think this is just a theory of mine, but the gangs that controlled cocaine in 2011 did everything they could to keep meth off of Skid Row because meth is an upper and meth competes with cocaine in terms of sales. And I guess that maybe those same gangs adopted meth as a product that they would sell by 2015, and all of a sudden I saw meth replace everything primarily, um, which made for a so Skid Row was a little bit easier to be homeless in 2015, but there was a rise of just absolute insanity and I'd say violence. I mean, I was just involved in violent altercations, I'd say almost every day on Skid Row. And for no, it was just people are, and I myself was doing drugs and getting crazy and getting violent with people for no reason either. Um, but it's a rough life, but at the same time, um, Skid Row is kind of a trap that I felt, and I felt a lot of people felt this way, where it was just a little too easy to be homeless that I thought, well, I'm just going to keep doing this. It just wasn't, I just wasn't really, it was a routine that I got used to, and the weather was nice, and I wasn't bothered by the police or anything, and I was fed every day and clothed from the missions and everything, and I kind of figured I could probably do this forever.
Wow.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'll just tell you from experience of being homeless up in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, I felt that same kind of trap where
yeah,
it's almost like you rationalize it in your head that, I can do this. It's not that bad. You kind of make friends out there. Your main focus, your priority, at least my priority was my drugs, was getting the heroin.
Yeah.
So as long as I had that taken care of, then everything else was, I guess, bearable, you could say.
Yeah.
As much as it
Yeah.
sucked to be out there on the street, uh, the priority was the dope, and that's the power and the insanity of addiction. You'd mentioned to me too that you'd lived in other places, that you were homeless on the East Coast in Miami and in New York, and you mentioned that they handle things a little bit differently over there. Could you talk a little bit about how they treat homelessness in New York City as opposed to how they do it in LA or San Francisco?
Sure. New York City, I lived there 2012, 2013, and I was actually sober when I moved there. Uh, not long-term sober, but I had a few months after going to a sober living, and moved to New York. And I was homeless there for a short term, about a month. And first of all, the weather is not as hospitable. I was homeless there in the summer, so it was very hot. Obviously, it's better than being homeless there in the winter, but they had you just couldn't be homeless. I mean, you couldn't just, if you slept on the sidewalk, you're going to jail. If you tried to sleep in the subway, you were going to jail. If you fell asleep on the subway, you were going to jail. It was kind of intense actually. And I found myself at a homeless shelter. So they have a big homeless shelter on, I think, First Ave and 30th Street or something, around the big hospital there. And it was pretty difficult. You had to wait in line every night for a few hours before you were given a place to sleep in the homeless shelter. Um, so that's what I did. I did that. I didn't sleep outside because it seemed impossible. I don't think it's impossible now. I think everything's changed. This was when Michael Bloomberg was president, and I mean not president, governor. When Michael Bloomberg,
Mayor, yeah, when he was mayor,
or yeah,
right,
mayor.
right.
Sorry, I can't say that. Okay. Michael Bloomberg was mayor, and I was there during the transition to De Blasio, um, and it was kind of it was rough because they could do stop and search, and I got stopped and searched several times and went to jail. They just take you to jail, and it's funny because I was really against it. And I am. That's a little overkill, just being able to search anybody. But it's
Yeah.
funny because they searched me and they found drugs on me and they take me to jail. And yeah, so that
So what do you think is we talk about like we want to reimagine public safety, and look, being homeless isn't a crime. I agree
yeah,
with you. Being a drug addict is not a crime. I agree with that too. Um,
yeah,
but there doesn't seem to be a lot of infrastructure other than jail as the alternative to get people off the street. Maybe in New York, because they have right to shelter, there's shelter beds. But
yeah,
California certainly doesn't have enough shelter beds to cover its entire homeless population. So,
yeah,
what do you think would be a good idea, if you have any? Because it seems like our politicians are lacking in some innovative ideas to address the
yeah,
homeless issue. And while I support housing as an end goal, housing takes years and years to create.
yeah,
So what do we do to the people that are just living on Skid Row that have been? I was down there a few months ago. You have clearly have people that have been living on Skid Row for decades that are on
yes.
the street in tents. What can we do? Like, what innovative solutions can you think of that we can do to get people off the street now as an alternative to jail? Because that's what everyone's talking about. Everyone says, well, we don't want to put people in jail, but nobody seems to have any ideas of what to do otherwise, other than housing. But there's this big gap of space in between those two things that
Yeah,
has yet to be filled. So, do you have any ideas?
I do. I first want to say that I ended up going to jail long term, and it saved my life. Now, that doesn't mean I think jail is the solution. It just seems to be the solution available right now. And it is not the best solution, but it certainly was a solution for me. I mean, it got me off heroin. But there's definitely a better solution. And I would like to use the Midnight Mission as an example. The Midnight Mission is a mission on Skid Row, and I lived there for 6 months. And it is no more. I mean, it's a completely different program now. It was a secular based mission that relied on 12-step programs and incentivized housing in terms of you live at the Midnight Mission in a dormitory for 1 year. You can't use drugs. You got to go to school. You got to work at the Midnight Mission. volunteer work 20 hours a week. And if you do that for a year and you do all of your therapy and all your, you got all the time in the world. So they have group therapy and all these things that you can do. And if you do that for a year, you get to go to the top floor where you get to share an apartment with one other person. And then you can do that for a year. And then after that, by then you're already signed up for transitional housing or Section 8. But throughout the whole time, you can't get high. If you get high, you start all over. And what I like about this program is that at first we need an incentive to not get high. And then once you do the work on yourself, you start going to, for me, I went to AA, I did the 12 steps. Um, then it took hold, this idea of permanent long-term sobriety. And I had a whole, reawakening of the way that I look at life, and I am sober, and I am confident that I will remain sober now. But at first, when you're 5 days clean off heroin or crack or meth, it's hard to just have some kind of great awakening in your mind. You need incentives. So at first the incentive was, I get to go sleep inside and get a nice pillow and a bed. And then after, getting acclimated, it was, oh, if I do this program for a year, I can actually attain housing where I can have a shower and have my own little area, have my own little room. And that way I can go get a job, and go and be, be a responsible adult. And if and you're paying very low rent, obviously, if you go get a job, it's like, I think they take 25% out of your check to just donate to the Midnight Mission. And you get on with your life,
Yeah.
I think with all the funds that we have, we should be building, super complexes that are modeled off of what I just explained, where
Hmm.
um, if you're out there doing crimes to get high and you get arrested, I think they should take you to these kind of places. And they say, hey, you can do this program. And listen, this isn't a 3-month program. This is long term. This is a long-term program. Um, 18 months, 2 years. And if you can rise up and you can eventually get some quality housing, and then eventually you'll be able to afford to go get your own housing.
Yeah.
But if you mess up, you got to go to jail. I mean, and drug addicts need incentives. There has to be consequences. And
Yeah. That
because
that seems to be the problem now, is that we've
yeah,
removed a lot of accountability out there for
yeah,
people that are using drugs because we want to support them and destigmatize them. I understand that whole thing, but
yeah,
addiction is the disease of more, right?
yes,
So, and that seems to be kind of lost in the conversation that, someone that's struggling with addiction is always going to want to get more.
yeah,
So offering incentives, I think incentivized treatment, incentivized housing, I think is a great idea.
right,
Um, they're starting to do that in some places in North America, not so much in the United States, but in like Canada, they're starting to look at things like therapeutic communities
yeah,
where you're living kind of in that type of situation. But one thing that you said that was very poignant that I wanted to just emphasize is that in this program that you were in, if you relapsed, you had to start over. But
yes.
if you relapsed, you weren't kicked out. You just had to start over. Is that right?
No, if you relapsed, you were kicked out. And
Okay.
now sometimes, depending on who you were and what your attitude was like, you could get let back in 5 days. When I
Okay.
got kicked out, it took me a month to get back in.
Okay. Okay.
Um, and
And when they kick you out, this is a legit question. Like, if they kick you out, are you just out, or do they give you any resources to go somewhere else? Can you go to the URM across the street, or are you just out?
Sure, you can go to another mission, but you have established a community at this mission, so you really want to get back into that, the one that you were already at. But an important point is that this all changed around 2016, I think, and the
Okay.
Midnight Mission is no longer. Their program is purely a housing program, and it's not a requirement to be sober anymore. And listen, from what I hear, I know a lot of people that were homeless on the streets on a fast path to death, and now are young professional people that have started families that are in Los Angeles. And the word on the street is that the Midnight Mission has kind of lost that pizzazz that of transforming lives, because for some reason you don't have to remain sober. You can be on drugs
They,
and still be in the
they,
program.
and that reason is federal grants. So they went for the money. That's just being honest. That's what happened.
Yeah,
I know that a union rescue mission across the street, Andy Bales, for he for didn't go for those federal grants,
yeah,
and is still operating kind of the traditional way. And I think the point here is that there's no one best solution to homelessness. But I
yeah,
think that it's important that the federal government, because they're the ones that control a lot of this funding, recognize that we need all these different tools available, from abstinence-based housing that's incentivized, like the
yeah.
program you were in, all the way to permanent supportive housing. But having it just be one or the other isn't necessarily going to be the best solution, because addiction and recovering from homelessness and addiction is not a one size fits all type of thing. And
Yeah.
everyone says that, well, if we just give you housing, there, everything gets better. But
No,
if they put you in an 80 square foot room, right, and you don't have your own bathroom and a shared kitchen, and you're struggling with meth or fentanyl, that's one of the most dangerous things you can do
that's a
for a drug
dangerous.
addict. Yeah,
Yes.
because you're isolating that person
Yeah.
from his community, and I
Yeah.
think that that's a risk. So, yeah, these are great ideas, Jared. That's great. So, now you're in recovery, right?
Yes.
You said you're about 3.5 years into recovery or
Yes.
so.
August 10th, 2018. I've been sober since then.
That's fantastic. I'm June 24th, 2018. So we're right close to each other, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank
So
you.
so what do you do now?
Right now, I work in visual effects for television. I work for a company that uh, does visual effects for some major TV shows on network television and Netflix and things like that. Um, and listen, it's a great career, and I'm on a great path. And I was someone that was destined to die in the gutter on the streets. I mean, I was um, someone with a criminal record, someone with addiction so intense that, like, I couldn't even go a few days without ending up in the hospital or ending up in jail. And through recovery, I've turned into a near model citizen, I'd say. And I'm not trying to brag or anything. I'm just trying to display the transformation that occurred.
Right.
So there's a lot of people out there. You see these people out there getting high and talking to themselves and all that. um, these people are still people, and if you take away the drugs and you give them some, if you give them an opportunity to recover, um, some of these people can become uh, model citizens, and be
That
happy. It doesn't even matter. Who cares if you're a model citizen, but they can become happy and productive and be a net positive on society, as opposed to a net negative. I was a net negative. I cost the state of California over $1 million in surgeries and hospital stays and all that. And I'll never be able to pay that back. But um, my goal is just to be a net positive on society today.
that's fantastic, man. Congratulations. We
Thank
need
you.
this is what we need. We need people in recovery to speak up, to speak out, to talk about how recovery kind of transforms your life. And it's not perfect, man. It's not a perfect ride.
Yeah,
And it takes a lot of work, and all it takes is one slip for you to fall down that cliff. But man, when you're able to walk the walk, I think that's really telling of why recovery is the way out for so many people out there. Is it the solution for everyone? I don't know, but for people like you and me, yeah, it is.
yeah,
It is the solution. It is the way out. So there's a movement right now that's growing out there, and it's framed around harm reduction, which I support aspects of harm reduction for drug treatment for
mhm,
people. But there's kind of a more radical fringe that talks about just supporting drug users indefinitely and decriminalizing and eventually legalizing and providing a safe supply of heroin, meth, and fentanyl to people on the street for free, so that
yeah.
people can just continue to use dope. And the thing that I take from that is that there's almost an assumption that recovery for a lot of people just isn't possible, that it's just too hard for people. What message would you have for someone that supports that narrative about recovery? What message would you have for them?
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone. I take anyone's opinion with a grain of salt that hasn't experienced this firsthand. I mean, if you don't have experience with addiction or homelessness, it's hard to even respect your opinion sometimes. Not that doesn't mean that I don't have respect for anyone that hasn't been homeless or shot heroin, but um, you need to you need to understand the brain of a drug addict to think about a solution like that and how ludicrous it is. Um, if you, that's like saying, like, if you gave me unlimited access to heroin, I would be dead tomorrow. I mean, that's just how it would work. And the idea that recovery is not possible, I was told that recovery, I was told by people, why don't you just go on methadone for the rest of your life? Or, this doesn't seem possible for you. And I would tell myself that, this is just impossible. I'll never be able to get sober. I'll never be able to get off heroin. And that mindset took away nearly 10 years of my life. I know plenty of people that uh, messed around with drugs and got recovery the first time when they were 22, 23 years old. And I didn't get it till I was 29. And I lost my 20s to this. And my dad lost nearly his 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s to this until he got sober. So, is it impossible for everyone? No, I think it's possible for everybody, but you have to put the work in, and you have to, um, it just has to be the right time for you, I guess. Harm reduction sound I understand. I'm not against Suboxone or I'm not against methadone. I understand this, but I support a tapered use of Suboxone where it is used temporarily to get you off, because Suboxone is harder, in my opinion, it's harder to kick than heroin. And it's spiritual enslavement. Now it's legal spiritual enslavement, which is better than heroin, and it's safer spiritual enslavement, but it's still spiritual enslavement. You're not giving, these people that you just want to let uh, have free drugs and get high and control the situation that way. The biggest victim in this situation is the drug addict. I mean, every drug addict has an opportunity to prosper in recovery and become the best version of themselves. And this solution is really just holding them down, in my opinion.
That's great, and I agree with you 100%. So, a lot of work, there's a lot of work out there ahead for
Yeah.
everyone that's involved in this. The problem is getting worse. We had 100,000 overdose deaths last year in the United States. Um,
Yes.
over 11,000 just in California,
Mhm.
650 in San Francisco. So the problem is deepening. But with voices like yours, we can hopefully kind of change the narrative a little bit on how we
Yeah.
approach addiction and homelessness, and try to make a dent in this crisis and make some real um, permanent change with people. Because I think that's the goal: is that we want to change lives, because it's not enough just to stop using the drugs. You also need to have hope. You need to have a purpose. Human beings require purpose, I think, and I think that's one of the things, one of the gifts that recovery gives a lot of people, is it gives them purpose. So I think we should promote that as much as possible, because it's like I said earlier, it's a great way out for a lot of people. So,
Yeah.
Jared, thank you so
Absolutely.
much, man, for taking the time to speak to me. I really appreciate it. Your voice is incredibly important. I'd like to share your voice out there to join with mine and with others in recovery as we try to, build a movement to change people's perceptions on what they think of people that are on the street, and what kind of life can someone that's come all the way from the streets of Skid Row in Los Angeles or the streets of the Tenderloin in San Francisco, what kind of life we can have in recovery. And I think it's something that is worth sharing and that people need to know. So, Jared, thank you again so much.
Thank you, Tom, for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.